welcome to a ruined chapel by moonlight. I'm your host, Errol Gambro. Today we're reviewing Tales from the Annexe by Audrey Driscoll. This is a collection of short stories by Audrey Driscoll, author of the Herbert West series, a brilliant reimagining of H.P. Lovecraft's amoral scientist. The first 7 stories in the collection all tie in with the series. It's probably not necessary to have read all the books to enjoy them, but I'd say at least The Friendship of Mortals is required reading for sufficient grounding. The Nexus is told in a classic Lovecraftian fashion, in that it is a document contained in a letter. The letter's author is Professor Quarrington of Miskatonic University. Quarrington reveals his ties to the Starry Wisdom cult, which features in one of my favorite Lovecraft tales, The Haunter of the Dark. He goes on to explain how, through his own peculiar skill for predicting the future, he sees great potential for good or evil in his student, Herbert West. Fox and Glove is a mystery story, wherein West's friend, librarian Charles Milburn, seeks to locate a specific book in the home of a recently deceased bibliophilic professor to win a bet. Milburn enlists West's aid in helping him acquire some clues, as only West can, and then sets about uncovering the mystery using his own knowledge of cataloging, one of my favorites from this collection. From the Annexe is an exploration of the homoerotic elements of West and Milburn's relationship. This story is probably the one that adds the least new information for those who have already read the series, but it's still a fine character sketch. A Visit to Luxor is a prelude to Driscoll's novel She Who Comes Forth. West, now traveling under the name Francis Dexter, and his servant Audrey encounter a mysterious man in Egypt. One of the 14. West, again as Dexter, is forced to confront someone from his past at a pub. This story has more outright fantasy elements than the others, and demonstrates how far the protagonist has moved from the ultra-rationalism he displayed in his earlier career. The Night Journey of Francis Dexter is similar to the one before, as Dexter is once again confronting something from his past. He intends to atone, but finds altogether more than he bargained for, and is again caught up in fantastic supernatural horrors. The Final Deadline of A.G. Halsey is the most intriguing of all 7 of these stories because it is the prologue to an as-yet unwritten sequel to She Who Comes Forth. Even as she is dying, Alma Halsey is compiling information on the strange behavior of her granddaughter since her return from Egypt. In addition to these 7 stories of the Herbert West series, the collection contains 7 more standalone stories, and in my opinion, while the West stories are all good, this part is where it really starts to shine. Welcome to the Witch House is a reimagining of Lovecraft's The Dreams in the Witch House. Just as she did for Herbert West, Driscoll reinvents Lovecraft's setting, populating it with real human characters instead of the paper-thin ones HPL wrote. Driscoll's retelling only gets as far as setting the stage for the action that takes place in Lovecraft's story. As she notes in the afterword, she felt she had nothing to add to the rest of it and abandoned the effort. I beg to differ. Witch House is one of Lovecraft's most fascinating works to me, not because it's good, but because it's so weirdly flawed and yet so inexplicably compelling. To me, it contains both the best and worst aspects of his writing all at once. Driscoll's touch would be most welcome. The Ice Cream Truck from Hell was originally posted in serial form on Driscoll's blog. I read it when it was originally published, and I read it again when I bought this collection. It holds up beautifully on rereading. The atmosphere is marvelous, and the characters, from young Will, the protagonist, to his troubled friend Harold Duffy, to Will's pompous father, are all expertly drawn. Both times I've read it, it's made me think of Bradbury, specifically Something Wicked This Way Comes. The atmosphere of 2 kids wandering around in an October evening is wonderful, and the sinister ice cream truck and its crew aren't even the most unsettling elements. Make no mistake, this collection is worth buying for this story alone. The Color of Magic is about a young man named Mark who is forced to share his home with a peculiar tenant while his mother is away. The strange lodger does nothing overtly threatening, and seems to be just a dreamy lover of incense and yoga, until she asks Mark to help her paint her room, at which point it becomes clear she is acquainted with far more esoteric forms of mysticism. It reminded me a little of Lovecraft's The Music of Eric Zahn, the mysterious older person who is clearly in touch with something far beyond the everyday. Beautifully written, of course, and leaves the reader with just enough information. A Howling in the Woods is about a young boy abandoned in the woods by his father when he hears a mysterious noise. Eventually he is found again, but after some strange transformation has taken place. There's a bit of an environmentalist message to it, although everything is left very ambiguous. But the atmosphere is once again first rate. The Glamour is about a middle-class teenage girl who becomes convinced she was switched at birth with the daughter of a posh family. Her obsession with confirming this notion leads her to an even more surprising discovery. This was really well done. At first it felt like it could just be a YA story about a girl whose imagination had run away with her. But as is so often the way in Driscoll's stories, there's more to it than meets the eye. The Blue Rose is set in a society that seems to have been created after some dimly remembered cataclysm. Dion is an artist who wishes to create a blue rose for an important ceremony, and he ventures outside the protective city limits and into the dangerous, blasted lands to do it. The world of this story is first rate, and I'd be delighted to read more set in this place. Like The Ice Cream Truck from Hell, I'd read this before in another collection, but happily reread it. It struck me on second reading that it really is about art, and the risks artists must take to make it. Creating art involves a kind of danger, if not generally the physical kind depicted here. To make something great is to run a risk, and often involves sacrificing a bit of oneself. The Deliverer of Delusions is not actually the last story in the collection. It comes between Witch House and Ice Cream Truck. I presented all the others in the order the author arranged, but I had to save this one for last, because it's a sequel to The Repairer of Reputations by Robert W. Chambers. Long-time readers probably know that I consider Repairer of Reputations to be the greatest work of weird fiction I've ever read. It's simply perfect. Spare, yet layered with fascinating ambiguities. It doesn't overwhelm you with weirdness. It doesn't announce its weirdness ahead of time, nor does it play it out too long and let it become mundane or tiresome. It gradually sinks its claws into you, and by the time you even notice something strange is going on, you're in too deep to get out. It's just a masterpiece. I won't say any more about it. If you like weird fiction, and you're reading this blog, so you probably do, you should read it. Try not to read anything more about it before you read it, if you can. It's important to go in with as few preconceived notions as possible. So, that's my take on Repairer of Reputations. Naturally, the idea of a sequel by a different author, even one as supremely gifted as Audrey Driscoll, filled me with trepidation. Can anyone write a sequel to another author's work? A good story is like a distillation of a writer's vision. Properly done, it conveys a whole mental image built up gradually in the synapses of an author's brain. Can another author presume to match the resulting gestalt so perfectly? Should they? I have to be very careful what I say here, because I'm trying not to spoil either story. So, I'll just say that Deliverer of Delusions is a worthy sequel to Repairer of Reputations. In fact, it adds on another layer to the original tale that I had never considered. Is it as good of a story? In my opinion, not quite. It's much shorter, for one thing. But it follows the ancient principle, first do no harm, and detracts in no way from its legendary predecessor, and will be an enjoyable treat for fans of Chambers' original story. But do read the original before you read this one. I must insist upon this. To do otherwise is simply a disservice to both stories. Those are my reviews of all the stories in this collection. And yet, I feel my work is not done here. I've spoken of the trees, but not the forest. A proper collection of stories is more than the sum of its parts. I have compared Driscoll to Lovecraft, Bradbury, and Chambers, and she is certainly worthy of being mentioned alongside them. But it is unfair to her to merely say she writes admirably in the manner of. Driscoll's style is uniquely hers. Reading this collection made me appreciate this more than ever. As I said above, stories are distillations of a vision, and a collection of stories is a window into an author's mind, the creative world they inhabit that enables them to turn the everyday, an overheard distortion of Brahms' lullaby, for instance, into a whole world, complete with people and stories and history and mystery. It's become a cliche to say that all of some group of fictional works take place in the same shared universe. But that's true for authors. In some sense, all of an author's works take place in a universe that exists within their head. And the greats, like Driscoll, can take us to that universe and introduce us to the people, show us the color of the sky and let us smell the air. We come back again and again and feel like we carry some part of the place around with us even when we leave. Tales from the Annexe transports you to a world of horror and mystery, magic and wonder. It's a must read.